we're taking front axle out of there with the plasma cutter. Come on, show you how it's done. Now pulling the front axle out of a YJ, super easy because of leaf springs. You don't have anything under any kind of tension that may take your head off. But XJs, TJs, and newer, got the little ticker tail coil springs. Those things are under tension all the time. So you gotta be really careful on how you release this front end, otherwise you've got projectile on your hands. And another thing you gotta look for, coil springs. Whenever you got coil springs, you've got a track bar. I can hear it now, but my YJ has a track bar. Well, you know what? YJs do come out with factory track bars. I don't believe in them. My YJ doesn't have them, and I would never build a YJ and leave the track bars on it. But whenever you have a coil spring front end, you got to have the track bar, because the track bar's job is to keep the axle centered underneath the rig. Versus a YJ, which is a leaf spring rig, the leaf springs are doing the job of keeping the axle centered under the rig. Come on, let's go and look at my YJ. I'll show you what I mean. Now here we are with the front axle of my YJ. Notice right here, see those? One on each side, that's your leaf springs. On a YJ or any leaf sprung rig, those springs right there hold your axle centered within inside the whole chassis of the frame. So track bars are not needed on YJs. Notice right there is where the track bar should mount. It ain't there, and it won't ever be. The same with my rear axle. I took it off as well. Anytime you've got a coil spring front end, those coil springs cannot control that axle laterally within inside the chassis. So you've got to have something to hold that axle centered within the rig. And that's why your coil spring rigs have track bars. You got to have them on your coil spring rigs. So I don't have a whole lot of time nor patience. I'm pulling out my plasma cutter, cutting that, and probably cut around this right here to release that track bar, or maybe do it over there. I'll see which way it's easier to get to. And then my drag link, I'm gonna cut that right there. That will loosen up all the steering stuff, so when I'm ready to lower that axle down, that stuff won't be in my way. Now I get it, I'm kind of cheating here, okay? If I was in a junkyard, I'd actually have to use tools to take out the bolts and all that kind of stuff. I'm not in the junkyard, I'm at the house, so it's time to cut. There's the track bar, no longer attached. Sway bar end links, cut. Drag link, cut. Track bar, cut. So what does that leave? It's time to take out the shocks. So what I would recommend you doing is going to the auto parts store, rent some coil spring compressors. You can probably grab about 3 coils and taking that pressure off of that's going to be safe. But if you can grab 4, go for it. You're going to have one on this side, and one on this side. You'll tighten the compressor down. It'll squeeze this spring down, and you'll be able to take the tension off. Then release your shocks. And once you get the tension off the springs, you take off these bolts right here, and that will allow you, somebody's turning around my driveway. And once you take the pressure off the springs, then you come down here, take these 2 bolts off the shock, allow the axle to drop, and you'll be able to take your coils out. Now, taking out your coil springs on an XJ, they are under some tension. Like I've got the suspension completely dropped right now, and you can see I've got some movement up here, and I can just about pull it off that donut right there, as some people call it. But here's the caveat to that. If you've got lift springs in, like a 3-inch lift spring, something like that, that space in between this area right here, this spring's gonna be more compressed. So it could very possibly, obviously, be under more pressure. But look right here. The spring is captive right there. It's got this band coming over top of it, and that is a 1/2-inch bolt holding the bottom of the spring to the axle bucket. And then you got all this bump stop sticking out right here. that prevents the spring from exiting the chat. So what do? You should be pretty well safe just getting you a 1/2 inch socket and take off the 2 bolts right here. That will allow the axle to drop down to free your coil. But again, if you're running lift coils, this is going to be under more tension. But your other option is, here is the top of your shock absorber. It goes through the shock tower and comes out right here. So you can take this bolt off right here, this nut off this stud. Eventually the nut comes off, comes down through the bottom of the shock tower, releasing the pressure of the coil. Again, you know, you've got this bump stop and it's captive right here. Don't take this off until the very last step. So with the bump stop up top and the strap on the bottom, it should prevent that coil from jumping out and hurting somebody. But just in case, if you want to be super safe, let me show you something. This hit you would be in the junkyard, cut you out a seat belt, wrap around the coil, come down here and wrap around, like, you know, the tie rod here, for instance. That will just give you added insurance and might make you feel a little better if you've never done this before, preventing that coil from coming out and being a projectile. Yeah, I totally get it. Some of you out there are thinking, really, Chuck, you ain't got to go through all that for an XJ taking the coils out. I'm doing it because it's a coil spring front end. There's several vehicles out there that have coil spring front ends that don't have those safeguards, like the extended bump stop or the strap on the bottom of the coil. The coil just sits in a bucket on the bottom A-frame. It sits in a bucket up top. There's nothing really being captive about the spring to prevent it from flying out. So I would rather teach people to be overcautious than say, it'll be all right, and someone get hurt. So wrap something around that coil if it makes you feel better, to prevent that thing from coming out. Now I'm going to take the plasma cutter and cut it out. Yeah! And as you can see, totally no problems. Even though XJs are pretty safe about removing the coil springs because they're so captive, meaning that you got your bump stop and you've got that strap at the bottom of your coil, please go ahead and do this right here, just be safe. And now, 1/2 inch socket, take it out. Now that you've got the strap out and your springs loose, you're thinking, I can't get it out, what am I gonna do? Then you think, well, I just push down the axle, that'll give me more room. You push and you push, it only moves just a little bit, but not enough. And here's why, your lower control arm's bottoming out right here. You're not gonna move it much further. So what do? Get a big old honking screwdriver or a pry bar, get up underneath that spring like it's right here, pry over, and keep pushing that sucker that way. And so here's the deal. I'm holding the camera and I need both hands at the moment, so you got the point. Try to keep your hands out of there because it might bite you. The bottom, let me show you something. The bottom of the springs hit the axle right there. I did have it pushed back, clearing it, and all of a sudden it just kind of jumped back in place. So basically you want the spring, push it off the axle, then get it off the bump stop. Told ya. Safety glasses on. That's a fine howdy doody. Not a hard fix, but yeah, wrapped right around the tie rod. You know, I pulled that coil out and I thought of something. I was at Jeep Invasion a few years back, and there was a YJ that was converted to coils, and they used old coil springs out of something other. I'm assuming an XJ. Front end up was 4-length with coils. It was kind of cool, actually. What he had done, he had full width axles like these. That's a 14 bolt and a Chevy 10 bolt. And since he was putting full width axles under that narrow frame YJ, he put his spring buckets way out here, hand fabricated them, put them out here. And he had a 14 bolt as well, so he did the same thing to put his spring buckets right along in here to match up the width of the frame. Then coming off the frame, he built buckets coming off right here for the coil springs to ride inside here. Then he had a 4-link set up going back to the middle of the Jeep. It was a pretty simplistic setup, and it was pretty cool. And from the looks of the battle scars on it, he wheeled it hard, so obviously it was holding up. Now, what I've read in the forums and stuff is the people who do that 4-link setup with just junkyard coils, oftentimes they're using like JK coils or something like that because they tend to be quite a bit taller. So if you guys know anything about that, I might do something like that to Rust Bucket. Leave down in the comments if anything you've seen set up like that and what coils they use, and try to give me some ideas of what I might be able to go with. Because these full width K20 axles right here are going for Rust Bucket, and so you never know. I really want 0 approach angle on the front, but that's hard to do with leaf springs. So if I linked it, I could get that 0 approach angle pushing my axle out forward. That would work out really well. I'm going to pick up another frame for Rust Bucket probably within the next few weeks, because this frame, I'm tired of patching it. It needs another frame. Now we're at the point we're going to remove the axle from the rest of the chassis. Now if you're in the junkyard, you're going to get the proper wrenches and stuff and remove that bolt right there and the top one over there. Top control arms first, then we'll do the lower control arms. But I'm going to cut them with a plasma. It's about to get dangerous up in here, up in here. Now some of you are saying, Chuck, why haven't you cut your brake lines yet? Have you guys noticed I've been using a plasma cutter? Here's the deal. Cut all your metal first, get all the sparks over with before you cut any kind of fluid lines. If your fluid happens to be flammable and you got sparks, you may need a fire extinguisher. Then cut your fluid line. No fire extinguisher needed. Think about it. Order of operations. Cut the other side and I'm done, besides cutting brake lines. And my differential vent line's still hooked up. Cut your vent tube, or take it out properly, whatever you choose. Brake line time. See the comments now? Well, why didn't you just take the bolt out? Because I didn't want to. I just cut it, be done with it. Because when I cut the frame to put the trailer tongue in, I'm cutting this section out anyway. So it's not a big deal. So everyone, I realize that was a quick and dirty explanation of how to pull the front end out of an XJ. But hopefully that gives you an idea of what you need to do. Look, about to put the tongue in the trailer. Be sure to subscribe, hit that thumbs up, leave your cool comments down below. Peace. Later, y'all.